Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Mona, a board certified pediatrician and mom, and host of the PedsDocTalk Podcast. But I'm doing things a little bit differently today, and I'm having this conversation to be on our YouTube channel. Today's guest has been on my podcast before on an episode called Understanding Autism Characteristics and Breaking Down Stigmas. Her name is Andi Putt, Mrs. Speechy P on Instagram. She is a pediatric speech language pathologist who conducts autism evaluations and is a neurodiversity advocate. We are making this video today on my YouTube channel to discuss autism characteristics and provide some video examples submitted and approved by use by our followers. Thank you in advance for everyone who submitted these videos. Andi, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about autism.
Yeah, so tell everyone more about yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are and the work that you do.
Sure. So, my name is Andi. I am a pediatric speech language pathologist, and I have historically worked in the schools, and now I run my business, Mrs. Speechy P, and I do private autism evaluations because I couldn't just totally leave practicing. I was recently diagnosed as autistic and ADHD myself, very recently, just like a month ago. And it was really great to have that information kind of explaining a lot of the things that I experienced and giving me a better word because before I knew I was ADHD, but kind of understanding everything kind of goes together. And I'm excited to dive into that a little bit more, perhaps learn how to unmask myself and be my true self a little bit more comfortably than perhaps I was before. But I am excited to talk about autism. It's a special interest of mine. And I think really advocating and helping people learn, it's not just the stereotypical norms that a lot of people seem to think autism is. It's so much more than that. So excited to bust some of those myths and increase that knowledge.
Well, thank you. And yes, being able to provide that now personal experience, having gotten your own diagnosis and also the professional experience that you've had for years is so amazing. And we've already talked about a lot of the characteristics and breaking down those stigmas in that podcast episode. So again, I'm going to link that here. Make sure you take a listen to that because I think it's such an important conversation. Andi also taught me as a pediatrician a lot more inclusive language, which I'm still learning every day, so this is a growing process not only for all of you watching, but I think for people in the community that are maybe taking care of autistic children and the terminology and demystifying a lot of those stigmas like you said. So thank you for doing that. And I already have a YouTube video on my channel talking about autism signs, but I didn't have any visual examples. And I do believe sometimes these signs can be subtle, or maybe parents may not know what we mean by the terminology that we may use. So I'm really grateful for you to join me today because before we get into those examples, I want to ask, and maybe it might be helpful for our viewers, what would be the sort of domains we're looking at when it comes to looking at autism characteristics? And how would you sort of describe it to someone who's not sure at all where to start and what these symptoms and signs may look like?
Sure. So we do say characteristics more than symptoms. So again, with that terminology, but also I want to say I learn new terminology every day too, even though this is my area. I even say things that I'm like, after I say it, I'm like, dang it, that was the old way. And now I need to fix it, So I think just talking about it openly and then being like open to, oh, okay, I can change that. And then, recognizing your own words is so helpful. But just for anybody watching this, we all are learning. Um, but autism is a pattern of differences. So some people think it's just one or two things, and it's really a lot of different things, even though they might not always be super clear, especially when you don't really understand like the full spectrum of autism. So the DSM actually breaks it down into two main areas for social communication, and then they call them the RRBs, or the restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior. I like to do it into three areas. And the first one would be language development. So, how they're communicating, how they're using their language. The second one would be socialization. So, how are they socializing? Not are they antisocial or social, but how is that happening? And then the third area would be like interests, routines, and sensory processing. And so again, these can range from super clear. Super clear. So like not for language differences, it could be like not speaking at all to being highly, highly verbal and having an advanced vocabulary. So it's not like a present or absent thing for a lot of characteristics, which most people tend to think it is. It's more like, how are they using language? How are they communicating? How are they socializing? And then like looking at the intensity and the frequency, the duration, and then the quality of actions and communication, which I will say is sometimes really hard to get in videos, because I can show you a 5-second clip of something and people will be like, oh, that's normal. Everybody does that. And a lot of times people will do, like, kids are weird. They do weird things, all of them, autistic or not, because they're kids and they have a lot of energy. And so I think it's really important to think about, like, when we're watching these videos, this is not just like a 5-second clip of somebody doing something. There's going to be differences, and they're probably doing it way more often than just this short clip. So something to kind of keep in mind as you watch this, because all kids will do some of these things sometimes. We have to look at them holistically and at that whole picture.
Well, I love that you're approaching it holistically, because that's where I think a lot of parents can get confused. And using an example that we'll get into, the lining up of toys, like the order. My son did that 2 days ago. And, I know my son to not have, to be autistic. And so but I watched that and I'm like, if I posted that and if someone got that snapshot, they could be like, well, yes, my autistic child also lines up their toys. And so, when you talk about this repetition, you talk about that it's not just a 5-second thing, it's not just a moment in time. I love that you're prefacing that as we get into examples with videos, because I think that can be a confusing part for a lot of families. So thank you. And I want to dive deeper into these characteristics and show our viewers some examples if we have them. We don't have examples of every characteristic, of
Yeah.
course. But before we get into more videos, let's talk about the language differences and maybe a little bit about the social differences. Are there times where we can see sometimes early or precocious language skills? Because I think there's an often misconception that autistic children are delayed in speech or don't speak or whatever it may be. How would you kind of describe that when it comes to characteristics for autism?
Yeah. So if I am interviewing a parent and they're saying their child's first words were at 6 months, a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, they're brilliant. And my mind is like, oh, this could be autistic. So a lot of people think that those strengths mean it's not autism. But autistic kids can have a lot of strengths. So you might see like a highly developed vocabulary, especially for areas of interest. So a good example of this would be a child who knows all of the names of like construction vehicles, but maybe isn't using their words to ask for help or to communicate that they're hungry. Or use like, hey, look at that construction vehicle over there. It might be more like, bulldozer, bulldozer, I see a bulldozer, and without that social referencing. And so it's just kind of a difference in how they're using the language that they have. And additionally, language delays does impact a significant amount of autistic kids. So it doesn't, like, just being language delayed does not equal autism, but it could get you kind of in the door, especially if you have that language delay and then you've noticed differences in any of the other areas. Usually I say, because differences can be so subtle, if you notice differences in 2 of the 3 areas that I said, that's when I would recommend an evaluation. And usually they notice differences in language, and then they notice differences in like the routines and interests and sensory processing, especially. And then the social differences are so hard for people to recognize because we don't really look for that. We're not as adults, and nobody like taught us the neurotypical way of communicating. People just learn, and autistic kids, they can learn it, and they can mask with it. And so sometimes that's really hard for non-specialists to see.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that is you mentioned, and I think is in some of your visuals about autism characteristics, is a video. We don't have a video of echolalia, but what does that sound like, or how would you describe that to someone who may not be familiar? And when would that be considered atypical?
Sure. So echolalia, there's two different kinds. So there's immediate echolalia, and that would be like if I said, "Do you want to go to the store?" And you either said store or you said, "Do you want to go to the store?" And it happens that repeating right after. So kids do use echolalia to learn language. I would see it decreasing pretty quickly after the age of 2. And if it's present after the age of 2.5, that would be more of a sign of autism. Delayed echolalia would be if they're repeating those scripts at a later time. And so a lot of times we see this from kids like repeating things that they saw on TV, or they might say, like, hold you, to say, I want you to hold me. But they're saying hold you because they're repeating when the adult has said, do you want me to hold you? And then they get picked up. And so that is Gestalt language processing. And it just means that kids are learning like larger chunks of language before they're using single words. And again, that's 2.5. If you notice that happening, like the long scripts or the immediate echolalia, that would be a pretty strong indicator of autism, or at least a need to do an autism evaluation.
And so I think we may have some videos kind of going over a little bit of echolalia, but also just these language differences. And so I'm going to play those. So let's watch just 2 videos. So I'm going to share that, and we can see how, you can describe what's happening after that.
So big, so big, so big. I got, I got, I got, I got, I got, I got. Big, big, big. No walk, no walk, no walk. Hong Kong. Splashing.
That made a big splash.
Horse. Big horse. Big horse. Big horse. Kids. Big,
Hi, horsey.
big. So big. Horse.
Hi.
I'm sorry. And stereo, 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 stereo,
That's a nice big horse, huh?
stereo, stereo, stereo.
Does the horse scare you? He's eating grass.
Tasty. So tasty. So tasty. So tasty. Horse. Big horse. Big horse. Big horse. Big horse. Big horse.
He is big.
Big horse.
Wow.
Big horse. Big horse. Big horse. Won't talk. Won't talk.
So I love that we were able to share those videos. What would be something that you'd want to describe to people watching that video? And is there a time that what we're seeing can be neurotypical?
So I love that both of these kids were like smiling and happy and talking, because a lot of times when we see autistic kids, they are not doing those things. They are dysregulated, or not speaking, or having a hard time. But these kids were both very excited and doing very typical kid things. But what we saw that would indicate autism is actually several things. So the point of this one was to look at the repetitive language. So the rock video, you know, the child was saying the same thing over and over and over and kind of talking to himself as he was going through things. So both of them did that. And we could see this sometimes in typical kids, but not super frequently. So we would normally say, they would say more like, look at this rock, or hi, horse, kind of like the mom was in that video. It would be a little bit different than just saying what they're doing. The other things that I'd like to point out for the video that probably other people did not notice was like with the rock, the child was trying to pick it up and he was talking, but he didn't really turn back to look at his mom. Even when he picked it up, we would see a neurotypical child probably be like, look, I just picked it up after I tried so hard. And he actually did make eye contact when he said big one of the times. So he did make really good eye contact that was like socially referenced when he was telling his mom it was a big rock. But the other times we didn't see it. We even saw him point 2 times. So he pointed, I think, at the geese or the ducks or something. And we would see joint attention in neurotypical kids look different. So a neurotypical child would see the ducks, point at the ducks, and look to the mom, and then look back at the duck. So it's actually 3 points of eye shift gaze, and it can be mom, duck, mom, to make sure mom was looking at it, or duck, mom, duck, to kind of pull that back to it. And same with the splash. She pointed to the splash. She said that it splashed, but there wasn't that visual referencing. So really kind of subtle differences where a lot of people would see, oh, he pointed, and he pointed to something that was out of reach, and he pointed to even share that that engagement. So he shared that there were the geese or ducks, and he shared that there was a big splash, which are great strengths, but it didn't have that visual component to it, which is what we would see in neurotypical children. For the horse, he also points without eye contact. So pointing to share interest, that there's a cool horse right there, but not visually referencing mom. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is he had some gestalts or some scripts, and you heard that when he said, I'm sorry. If you just see that, a lot of people would be like, what's happening? But then he said, scare you. And that means I'm scared. But the way that he said it was scare you. And we heard mom kind of say, oh, did it scare you? And that's where he got that from, is he knows that when somebody says scare you, that means I'm scared. And probably when he's scared, either somebody has scared him and has said, I'm sorry, or it's just saying, I'm sorry that you're scared. And so he took that all in as a, I'm scared. So I'm sorry, scare you. And that was a script that he was using. We would not see neurotypical kids use that full large chunk of language. They would probably say scared, or I don't like that, you know, or whatever their communication was. And additionally, he didn't have a scared facial expression. So if he didn't have those words, we maybe wouldn't know. Like, he did back away. I also saw some fingers playing while he was doing that. That could indicate to me that he was feeling a strong emotion. But if you're not knowing what to look for, that would be very easy to miss. But I thought those were both really good examples of what we might notice in one thing, because their language was quite repetitive. As kids get older, it's not going to be that much. It may just be more like, well, I did da 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 da. Well, blah, 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 blah. And like, that's how they can start a sentence. Or maybe they know to start new topics of conversation by saying, and also, is a common one. Or they might say actually, or literally, or something like that more frequently than would be expected. But as little kids, we see that a lot. Big horse, big horse, big horse. Like, I'm excited and it's there. to communicate that desire.
Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. I love that we were able to show two really great videos, and you added so much that I think is going to be so helpful. And I love that you again pulled out the smaller details that sometimes we may not see. And like I've said already, many times parents may not know what they're looking
Mhm.
for and if that's typical or not. And so to me, especially using the example of the child with the horse, that repetition that he kept doing, like especially when he pulled away from the horse, big horse, big horse, big horse. Like, do you find that that's very common as well? Like, there's just like repetitive, and it's almost like he couldn't break out of that repetition.
It could be, or to me, also, I think he was excited and scared. And so you might see that repetition come out more when kids are feeling strong feelings. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something that they're stuck in and that they can't get out of. It could be a stim. They may like doing that. Or it might just be that that's how they know to communicate their strong emotions about something. And sometimes kids will repeat until a parent or the other person confirms that they, in fact, did hear them. And so you might see big horse, big horse, big horse until the other person is like, yes, it's a big horse. And then they can move on because they are aware that the other person heard them and has responded and confirmed that they are involved in that interaction.
Thank you. Yes, this was already so helpful. Thanks, Andy. The next thing
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about was I know sometimes, we talk about not responding to your name can be something that alerts parents of a concern. So, what are your thoughts about that as a characteristic of autism? Is it a definitive, or if not, at what age would this be considered atypical?
So kids learn to respond to their name, neurotypical kids, very early. So you usually see this start around 7 or 8 months, and then it's usually consistent by 1 year of age. And by consistent, I mean more than 90% of the time, because kids are going to ignore you at some times. Right? Like I ignore people sometimes as an adult, probably not when my name is being called, but I may choose to be a little bit slower on that uptake. And so we do expect kids to ignore their parents, especially when they're doing something fun or something really involved, like watching TV or playing a video game. They might be slower on that uptake. When it's inconsistent, less than 90% of the time, we are going to look again holistically. So, do we have other characteristics of autism present? And did we check their hearing? Because if you can't hear, you're not going to consistently respond. What we see a lot in autistic kids is they will respond like if you're like, Sally, I have cookies. And they might respond to the cookies very easily, or they might respond to hearing keys jiggling or something that is of interest to them, but then ignoring some of the more social components of language. Again, especially when they're highly interested in something. Or it may be slow. So, like if you called my name, I might say, what? And not look at you if I was autistic. And you might say it again, and I might say, what again? And then maybe on the third time, you say it a little stronger, and I'm like, what? And I might look at you then. So that it would be a lot like, am I turning to reference? Am I making eye contact when I'm responding? Autistic kids can do this too. They can do it consistently. So it's not like again, nothing is a sole indicator, and no skill is going to mean that a child is not autistic. But yeah, we do see autistic kids tend to respond less. And then they learn the skill. And then a lot of times people think because they were initially delayed and then they did a skill that it's not autism, but that's not necessarily true either, because autistic kids can make progress. They can learn skills. Responding to your name is a safety skill. And so I do say kids need to learn how to respond to their names. And most autistic kids do learn that. It just may be on a delayed time frame, or it may be more on an inconsistent time frame.
And I do have one video that was submitted, so I'm going to play that. You've already explained this, I think, beautifully, but if we'll play the video, and if you have any other comments after, we can go over it. But let's look at that.
Talia. Talia. Talia.
Okay, so these kids are so cute, first of all. I just have big smiles watching them.
I love the videos. I appreciate, again, the community who submitted these videos, but the kids are not only adorable, but they're really just helping kind of give us this information. And I agree. I love it. I think I love how adorable they are.
Right? So I don't know what Talia is doing. It looked kind of like autistic play because I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on. And so that's a good example. Like she was just kind of like pulling things off of a shelf, which again, kids are going to do that every now and then. But she was pretty into it enough to not respond to her name, even when her mom was like, Talia. And a lot of times we do see autistic kids who are not responding to their name. I will say that parents will panic at this, and then they're like, they just so badly don't want their kids to be autistic. And so then they try to hide some of these autistic traits, which you do need to respond to your name. But other things, they're not harming anybody. They're just a difference. And autism is just a difference in your brain. And it's not necessarily like a bad thing. It's more of a neutral thing. And then some pieces of it can be good and helpful for a person. Some things can be like things that we don't like about it. So like for me, I don't really love that I'm sensory avoidant. It can be difficult for me. And it can be very overwhelming. And so it's kind of like there's some good and bad with that. Just to kind of throw that out there to be sure that we aren't encouraging masking. We're not changing play, but we do need kids to respond to their name. And when parents panic about this, they will start calling their kid's name all the time and for no reason. No reason. So if I'm Talia, and then she looks at me and I have nothing and no reason to be calling her name, Talia's learning I don't need to respond to that. You're just taking me away from the things that I want. So I do want to caution parents, like we don't want to do that because that's going to force them to continue to not respond to their name. So we want to have a reason. We don't need to like panic about it and try really hard to get them to respond to their name, but that is something that we would work on. And we always want to have some reason or something that goes along with that. So I have a cool toy that you like, or it's time to eat. Let's go outside. Something exciting, and give them a reason to do it. Don't teach them that there's no reason to respond to their name because then they won't, right?
Well, it sounds like what we would do in neurotypical children too, right? Like teach them that, hey, the name, I'm calling you for a reason. And so I can see how that can extinct the actual desire in a child to actually want to turn to their name too. So really great. Again, thank you for following up on that video. And you already alluded to this in the video that we showed about the boy and the horse, where even when he was kind of getting excited, he wasn't really changing his facial expression. So I want to talk about affect. And so, the visual facial expressions. And sometimes it's thought that an autistic child may not show facial expressions like being happy or surprised, or, let's talk about that word animated as much. So how does affect relate to autism? And again, is there a spectrum here that we see?
Yes. So there's definitely a spectrum. For me, I have a flat affect, and I have learned to mask and smile, which I try to do to look like I'm not mad all the time, because my natural face is like, and I look bored and I look mad, and growing up, my mom's like, stop crossing your arms, which I do because I like that feeling. And also I'm cold a lot. And so I got told a lot that I looked mad all the time. And so I mask to try to smile, but I still don't really show a huge range of emotions. And also I have something called alexithymia, which means that I'm not always recognizing my emotions, and it's difficult to talk about my emotions. And sometimes that can be difficult to recognize other people's emotions and read other people's facial expressions. So this is very common in autism. And again, it can have a huge range, and it can range from more flat. Most autistic people can do like emotional extremes. So happy. We will direct our smiles. We might make angry faces. We might be scared. We might think that sad is only crying, and then not really have a better understanding of some of those more nuanced feelings. So, like to me, a lot of nuanced feelings I think are synonyms, but to other people, they actually have smaller nuanced differences. And then, alternatively, especially in girls, we are learning to mask, imitating other people and their facial expressions. And so sometimes you might see this overly expressive um, facial expressions and exaggerated reactions to things. So again, a really big spectrum. And then sometimes you might see kids who have been taught that they need to be happy. And so I'll like have kids who are like crying and clearly overwhelmed and upset, insisting that they are happy because they think that they need to be happy in order to make other people happy. So lots of differences in emotions, and this would fall under that socialization category with those emotions and understanding them and communicating about them and expressing them.
You mentioned the masking in girls. Why is it
Mhm.
that a girl would be more likely to mask that, or is that something that you see? I'm curious about that.
So boys definitely can mask too, but the way that society treats boys and girls is quite different. And so where boys maybe aren't quite as like we obviously don't want boys to hit other people, but that aggressive and rumble tumble fighting play is very accepted by society. Girls, that is not okay. You can't have those strong emotions because then you're acting like a baby or you're overreacting or, all the labels that kind of come with that, that society tends to be a little bit more strongly against for girls. If you have those intense interests as a girl, it's accepted if they're girl interests. So if you like rainbows and you like Polly Pockets or Barbies or squishmallows. Those things are all accepted because they're typical girl things. And then girls are just like they're raised to be more in tune to their emotions. And so they're adults. The studies show that adults use more emotion tied words with girls than they do with boys. So there's just a lot of differences and how society treats them. But I do think that there's probably some genetic differences as well that are going to impact that and make them a little bit more social in nature. And then we learn to kind of hide our autistic traits and things that get us negative labels like selfish or bossy. And then we turn that around to be people pleasers so that we can be better accepted. And so that's why you tend to see that masking talked about more with girls, but definitely boys can present with that non-stereotypical presentation as well. Um, it's just more often seen in girls and more often talked about in girls.
Well, yeah, and I know you know this, I know this, that girls with autism and ADHD tend to be diagnosed later because of this societal expectation and again, masking and all of these things that, well, you have to sit still and this and that and it's like this. And so yeah, I think it's a real thing I see too, in my clinical practice, but also my patients who, prime example of yourself, got diagnosed much later in life.
Right.
And so I think this is such an interesting thing. Now, I do have a video of a young girl playing, and then, the mom had submitted this video because she's, plays, and then we'll watch what happens, and then you can kind of explain what's going on in the video after I play it. So let's play that one.
We just need to put something in the middle.
This listens.
Oh, yeah. And everyone like that is the fun.
Very good. Yeah.
My teeth, but my tongue.
Oh no. Yeah, so tell us
Okay.
what we saw there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I am pretty sure that her parents submitted this video to show the lining up, right? Which again, if it happens once, if we're having a car parade, whatever it is, it's not like, I mean, either way, lining things up is not bad. But we do see autistic kids like to have order. So they might line things up, they might group things, they might like shape or like line them up or organize them by color, by shape, or by size. They enjoy that structuring and setting up play. That's their play. Whereas neurotypical kids, their play is whatever it is that they create with the things. But autistic kids can get really specific. They want the details to be right. If you're playing with dolls or action figures, they want all the little pieces on it to be just right. Whereas a lot of neurotypical kids are not too worried about those small details. But when I saw this, I thought it was really cool because she says, ta-da! And it's her face just kind of stays pretty flat. She looks at her mom. Her voice actually gets louder. So ta-da! But it's not like ta-da! The intonation isn't quite there. When she talks, she doesn't direct it to her mom, and I can't understand what she's saying. But mom seemed to. So I don't know if that was like a video thing or if it could have been jargon. But she's like, ta-da! And then her face on it, she just kind of like goes really back. So she kind of moved to like show her face, but it didn't quite do all the things that we would see neurotypical kids. And then immediately after, it was like right back down. Which is really interesting. And then I don't know if we cut that video down, but or if I just did it, if it didn't pull it up, but she does do like this grimace thing, like a awkward smile. And the video that I had, which was also a little bit strange. And then she points to her tongue like she bit her tongue, but it wasn't like, it just didn't quite match everything that we would see. But she was talking to her mom. She involved her mom. She shared what she built with her mom. So it was very social in nature, but again, just a difference in how she was social and how she communicated her emotions towards her mom.
Yeah, and we're going to get into more of that repetitive behaviors that you mentioned, the lining up of things. I think we have another example of that. Is there anything else you'd want to add in terms of the language and social differences that we may see in autistic children that we may not have
Yeah.
covered?
So a lot of times, especially when kids are young, they will use a higher pitched voice. A lot of people call it the Minnie Mouse voice. We might see kids adopt accents from like Peppa Pig, or just kind of like take some things from what they like, what they've observed, and pull it into their communication style. A lot of people describe it as baby talk, which I don't really love that description, but I do think that kind of makes people better understand what it sounds like. And it might be really monotone and flat, or again, it could be really melodic, or they might end with rising intonation as if they're asking a question, but they're not asking a question. So you see that, I see that a lot, that kind of unusual intonational patterns. And then a lot of other things that I would say, I kind of touched on how the differences in repetitive language can look with actually, as kids get older. But as far as social communication, I do want to say that about eye contact. Eye contact is not present or absent. And we kind of did talk about this, like when I said they're pointing or they're not combining their eye contact when they're talking to their parents. So again, this is one that we're going to have to look at holistically, because autistic kids usually can make eye contact. And maybe it's more comfortable when they're with their parents than with other people. So you might see them making eye contact stronger or better when they're with familiar or preferred people, and then absent at other times. Sometimes they may actively avoid eye contact. So they might turn their back to you while they're talking to you. But doesn't always have to be the case. And then just a couple more things. Like for me, my differences in social communication are that I'm very blunt. I'm not going to give you any hints about what I mean. I will just tell you what I mean. And often I expect other people to do that. So I may not, if you're saying something in a neurotypical way and giving a hint, I do understand a lot of neurotypical communication styles. So I can understand some, but sometimes if they're really subtle, I might miss it, or I might have to say, are you being serious or are you being sarcastic? Like I might just have to ask for some clarification sometimes. And so a lot of times you'll see this in kids and little kids, like 2-year olds, you might see them say somebody spat, and a parent might be so embarrassed because they said that out loud. This can happen with autistic kids a lot later than what you see for younger kids, or they might have to be told you can't, if you say that, you might hurt somebody's feelings more than what a neurotypical child might need, because to autistic kids, they're just saying the truth and they're just sharing their thoughts. And it's not mean natured at all. It's just like an observation that they've made or a thought that they've had, and they're sharing it with you. So I think that's really important to know. Like, it's not rude. I think a lot of kids get called rude when we need to really look at the intention and where that's coming from. And are they saying it in a mean way? Because saying somebody's fat isn't really, like, society thinks that that's a bad thing, but a lot of people are not, like, it's just, I'm fat, and that's okay, because that's okay for them, right? Just like autistic, it's okay for me. Whereas other people might be like, oh, you can't talk about that. That's a bad thing. But it just is, right? And so it's a difference kind of in how people can talk. And then the other thing I want to say that a lot of people don't understand is that differences in socialization can be overly social. So this could look like talking to somebody at the grocery store and telling them more than just, hi, how are you? Right? Like, we don't really share personal information with strangers or people at the grocery store or people that are not in our immediate comfort zone. And so we might share personal stories. So that you might see autistic kids talking about a history of abuse that they've had openly, whereas other kids probably wouldn't share that right away. So autistic people tend to make really deep connections, or try to make really deep connections, whereas neurotypical people tend to stay on that surface level. We might see autistic kids going and hugging a stranger, and people are like, oh, they can't be autistic because they're hugging somebody, and autistic kids don't hug people. And I have to be like, well, they hugged a stranger. That's really unaware of a dangerous situation, potentially, right? So, and that would be really unusual to do. Like, most kids are like, no, I'm going to stay by my safe people, and I don't know about you yet. And maybe once you've become comfortable with them, your parents have indicated that they're a safe person, then you would go to them. But yeah, so that overly social, sharing everything and talking to anybody and everybody, that is an autism trait.
Oh, very, very interesting. And I love that you're talking about this also because, when we talk about social norms, as we know, I mean, I know this and you know this very well, a lot of like social norms, social etiquette, especially surrounding children, doesn't take into account one, the developmental age of a child, and also children with neurodiversity. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
talk about impulse control. We talk about, this, what you just mentioned, like not going up to strangers, so I'm always, whenever I feel like I'm in a public situation and I feel like another parent is judging another parent, like I've been in the park and I've seen this happen. I always remind them, I'm like, we don't know the full story. Like, we don't know what's going on. Like, you can't always assume a situation, right? And I think I say
Right.
this because a lot of times when it comes to like boundary setting or behaving like on airplanes or behaving in public situations or using an iPad at dinner, like, you don't know what is actually going on, whether what the age of that child is, but also the development, and are they neurotypical, neuroatypical? So I always say give some families, all families, some grace.
For sure. And if you see somebody struggling, you can offer support. Like, do you need anything? Is there anything I can do? Not judge, right? So, not they're spoiled, or, what autistic parents get told so many terrible things in public. especially when they have a child who is overwhelmed with changes or overwhelmed sensory wise. They have no control over what happens when their body goes into fight or flight, and I think people just think it's like the kids being bad. But when I tell them, I'm like, their body is in fight or flight. So think about how if you were in a really dangerous situation, like a tiger was going to attack you, are you going to stop and think about literally anything other than getting away from the tiger or trying to keep your body safe, And that is exactly what's happening to these kids. So we need to provide them safety. We need to provide the parent with any support or understanding that they might need to be able to support the child, because the child is the person who we want to have that support overall. And it's the adults around them giving that to them. But if we shame the parent and if we shame the child, that's not gonna help anybody, right? Like that doesn't help the people shaming them. That doesn't help the parent. It might make the parent feel like they can't take their child in public. And then the child's never going to be able to go to public because they weren't allowed to. And so we need to give them those supports. And as a society, we can support parents by not staring. And sometimes I feel like I see a child who's on the brink of meltdown. And so I might kind of look and just wait until and see if they might need my help. And sometimes I'm like, oh, they're going to think I'm staring and judging. So sometimes I think it's important for parents to really think, just because somebody's looking doesn't mean that they're judging also. I might just be there ready to jump in and support you should you need it, but I'm not going to do that when you're not at that point, because that would be pretty awkward.
No, I love that. Oh, wow. We've already gone through so much, and I know we still want to do repetitive behaviors as well. And so we're going to go into that next. And we've already talked about it a little bit with the video of the little girl lining up her toys. So lining up toys is a common characteristic that we hear. Now, is this very common? Describe it again. And I know we have some videos that are going to be playing while you're talking.
Yeah. So lining up is a developmental play thing that all kids will do at some times. A lot of times when we see neurotypical kids doing this, there is a kind of like a more clear reason behind it. So they might be parking in a parking garage and then going and doing something else. Or they may be learning to categorize and play because somebody taught them to do that and they're pulling that into their play. For autistic kids, they like the structure, they like the precise placement, or they like the line. It makes them feel comforted. It gives them that routine. They know what to expect. But it's not always that clear. So like when I'm doing an autism evaluation, all I'm going to do is note that they line something up. And that's not going to be like a deciding factor of anything during my evaluation. It might be a part of the whole picture, but that's not going to be like, oh, they're autistic because they lined something up. So I think that's really important to share. And then I also want to share, I see people saying, well, it's normal unless they get upset when you break up their line. And some autistic kids will get very dysregulated when you break up their line, because they had a plan and you messed it up, and that was mean. I wouldn't like if you messed up my plan either. But some autistic kids are like, whatever, I'll just fix it. So like you don't have to be upset about it. You don't even have to be obsessive about it. We're just looking at how often it happens. What they're gaining from that is sometimes different. And don't mess up kids' things. Like there's no reason to do that. We don't need to test them. Unless they're literally in an evaluation, I might like tweak it a little bit just to see what they do, but I'm not going to do it to make them upset. I just want to see how they react. But yeah, we don't want to try to see if we can make kids upset by destroying their things.
Yes, please, for all children. Like there's no need to put them into intentional dysregulation or test mode. I love that. Another video I that was submitted was interesting to me. So a mom had submitted a video of a child W sitting and then bouncing up and down. And then for context, the child was also 15 months and not saying any words yet or responding to her name. Now, my question is this considered a repetitive behavior, the W sitting and bouncing up and down, or what are your thoughts about that?
So it could be. W sitting is when kids put their feet kind of back behind them and they shape their body into a W. And a lot of kids who have low tone will do this. A lot of autistic kids have low tone, which is why it can be associated with autism. But if I saw a kid W sitting, I wouldn't be like, oh, they're autistic. Or it wouldn't even, if it was just that, I wouldn't think that they needed an evaluation. So that does go together. Bouncing is a stim. It's giving them sensory input. And when we see it a lot, it would indicate that they are getting that sensory input or expressing their emotions with the bouncing. So with this video, if I just saw this video, I would be like, like it could be anything, right? It could be a typical kid, it could be an autistic kid. We know that he's autistic since his parents submitted this video. And then when we combine with the not talking and not responding to his name, then we get a better picture, right? There's more to this story than just this short clip.
Well, that's exactly why, because when I saw the video, I was like, this seems very neurotypical. And that's kind of why I wanted to include videos of characteristics that may seem neurotypical, but like you're describing, it's a whole big picture of, I'm not seeing a W sitter and automatically thinking, well, here we go, there's autism, but is it with these other spectrum or other characteristics as well? So love that. And the other thing that I'm going to show us now is a child who's watching wheel spin, because we commonly get that, the fixation on things that spin. So let's watch this video and then we'll get into that. So what is going on here? And when would this be a sign, a characteristic of autism? All the time or with other characteristics? Let's talk about what you're seeing in this video.
Yep. So this one specifically would make me think autism because the child is at eye level he laid down and put his face right by it. It was very short. So I would ask the parent, does this happen a lot? Is this primarily how he plays with his xylophone? Or how often is it happening? How close does he put his face? Does he always lay his face on the ground? I would have a lot of questions, but this is very common. Autistic kids really like to get close to things with their eyes and study them and watch all the little details as far as what's happening, as well as learning how things work and how things are built. And so that's why you see that really close visual inspection. And so, yeah, I would say when you see all of those together, or like they spin the wheel right in front of their face and it's happening, more than once a day or more, then it would be more likely to be autism.
Thank you, because I think that was just so beautifully, that was actually a really great video and a great explanation. And that eye level, what you're talking about, getting down to the eye level, because children can like things and want to know how things work, but that fixation now, I think we'll probably get into that in a little bit. Is that a form of visual stimulation for them, like stimming, and the fact that they get visual input? And we'll get into stimming a little bit later, so we'll talk about that in a bit. The next video I want to talk about is going to show some hand flapping. Now, the reason I want to show this video is kind of going along the lines of that W sitting that I commonly see hand flapping. So let's watch the video and then we can talk about that.
What are you doing?
What do we see here? How would you describe this? When would this be a concern?
Okay, so this is Lane. He's one of my friend's kids, and I just have to say that I love Lane. I have a lot of videos. I have a lot of videos of him on my Instagram as he gets older. So it is really cool to see him as he progresses. He's one in this video, 12 months, almost exactly. And his flapping was one of the first indicators of autism. So Lane has an older brother who's autistic, and so it was on his parents' radar. But they did not think he was autistic for a while. And when I saw him flapping because of the quality of his flapping, I knew it was autism. And so one thing I want to say is that autistic behaviors are human behaviors. So if I won the lottery right now, you would probably see me jumping up and down and waving my arms because I am very excited because I won the lottery. And I don't flap naturally. Maybe I did when I was a kid. I don't really know. But that wouldn't be an autistic trait for me. But I would if I won the lottery. And so I do want to kind of point that out. But when I look at Lane, we do see infants, they wave their arms and they kick their feet. That's when they're learning how to use their bodies. Okay. But Lane has several things that would indicate that this is atypical movements. So Lane's whole body gets very tense. He opens his mouth, ooh, and does this mouth posturing while he does it. In the video, between the flapping, he does some finger posturing as well. So you see that tension kind of all through his body. Also, when he's watching water, so he is feeling that strong excitement that I might feel should I win the lottery at watching water. So Lane is so easily excitable. It's like you can't be around him and his brother without just feeling joy because both of them are so easily excited. They also are so easily mad and they like to bug each other. So, like any sibling, right? And so they just feel those emotions so strongly that you see that joy really easily. And you also see anger really easily. And you would see frustration really strongly from them because they do experience those emotions in a stronger way. And so that's when flapping is so hard to really draw a good line between what is typical and what's atypical. But we do, when we see it more frequently, when we see that tension in their body and their face, if they're doing other things, jutting their faces out at the same time, then it's more likely autism than not. And again, if we're looking at the whole child, and even like, so for Lane, when I was trying to tell his mom why I thought he was autistic, a lot of it was strengths. Like Lane was really interested in the moon. And like when you can barely see it during the day, he was always like, look at the moon, and I was like, he notices really small details. I have another friend who was saying her child notices, like, just points out the fire alarms everywhere they go, smoke detectors and fire alarms. They're pointing them out. And so that's a really great skill. They're so perceptive, but it's a little bit unusual about what a typical kid might be drawn to. Like fire alarms probably aren't interesting to most kids. And the moon, when you can barely see it, probably isn't something that typical 15-month-olds are going to talk about because it's just not something that they would really care about. They don't really understand it. But autistic kids, they like those things and then they learn about those things and then they have a lot of information about those things that they can share with you.
So it's almost as if, because all kids can have interest, but it's almost as if the repetitive fixation on that interest, like the moon,
Yeah.
the moon, let me look at the moon. And it may not be that they're constantly saying like repetitive, like the kid with the horse, but that they're always looking for that sort of that item that interests them and wants to kind of be fixated on that.
Yeah, it could be. And also, it doesn't have to be like a narrow range of interests. They could have a variety of interests. But then still just notice some things that are maybe different or more advanced even than what you would see for typically at that age. And it's not always clear because a lot of boys love cars and a lot of boys love trains and a lot of girls love baby dolls. And so the interests don't necessarily have to be that different, but they might be pretty intense. And so they might know all the names of train stuff and they talk about the tender and they know all the dinosaur names and they like to name those dinosaur names, or they love their letters and they like to be quizzed about what letters they know. And so it's just kind of a difference in how that is. And it's not anything bad. We don't want to stop it. We actually would encourage those interests. But sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not.
Oh, so great so far. We have one last category to go into, which is the sensory differences. So we've already talked about language, social, communication, repetitive behaviors. Before we get into the sensory differences, is there anything else that you wanted to add where we weren't able to visualize for repetitive behaviors?
Let's see. I'm trying to think. We did kind of talk about the finger posturing and finger splaying. We see that a lot, the body tension. I think that's something that a lot of people don't really realize. And then we often in that area, we see differences in play. So that might be like preferring a play toy or repeating a play scene. Like people think that autistic kids aren't creative in their play. They can be. They can be very, very, very creative, like extra creative. A lot of special interest is in fantasy books and writing, which autistic people are really good at creating because a lot of times there's so much detail that goes into it. We're creating a whole world, which is really cool. But a lot of times when kids are younger and they're learning that creative play, we'll see them kind of repeat things that they've seen on TV or have like a set routine that they like to do as they play. And they might repeat that a little bit more often. They might not be accepting of other people's trying to change how that plays, or they just might really want to direct the play. So they might decide what they're going to do. They're going to give their mom and dad their jobs and they have to do those jobs. And there's a set plan. And then along with that could be the struggling with changes. So changes in routine or having things interrupted before they're ready for them, before they think that they're finished. That can be a very common, and like that need for structure, or they do really well with timers or having really clear limits of what's going to happen. You'll see that a lot.
And so now getting into the sensory differences, I know we've kind of had some discussion in the past about selective eating, sensitivity to sound, disliking hair washing, nail trimming, etc. And then the other thing is enjoying crashing into things, squeezing into things. But I wanted to dive deeper into stimming. I know we've alluded to that already. What can that look like for someone who's not familiar, and why do autistic children or autistic adults stim?
Okay, so first of all, everybody stims. Neurotypical people tend to do it in ways that are more socially acceptable. And so that could be like twirling your hair or clicking a pen or tapping your foot or just kind of moving just a little bit. For autistic people, we tend to need more sensory input. This is what it is. So a lot of times when people think about autism, they think sensory avoidance. So covering their ears, selective eating, struggle with the grooming. But a lot of autistic people really need sensory input. So that means they're going to go around and try and get their body to register more sensory information. And a lot of times we see that with rocking. We see that with the flapping, with the finger posturing and the splaying. When you give that tension in your hands, it sends those nerves and it's really good sensory input. I might chew on things. I might lick things. It can look just so many different ways. And when we get our sensory input that we need, our body feels calm and safe and regulated. And we're in a place where we're ready to learn or listen or communicate or do the things that we need to do once we have the correct sensory input or the correct avoidance. And it can really change. Like you can be sensory seeking in some areas and sensory avoidant in other areas. So you see the kids who jump and stim a lot, they also don't want that auditory input. Or they might watch the same clips of videos over and over and over to get that visual input, or they might stim visually and look at things with bright lights to get that input while also avoiding crowds. So it's very, very complex, and everybody has sensory preferences. Just autistic kids and people tend to process that information a little bit differently.
Oh, I love it. And thank you for normalizing that it happens for everybody, because you're right.
Yes.
I think during this entire video, this fixing of the hair is a form of my stim. So I really appreciate that. And the next thing I wanted to talk about was developing sound sensitivity. So, I know I see this commonly, especially around the age like 7 to 9 months, 10 months. Some babies more than others can start to develop sensitivity to sound. Using an example, a vacuum cleaner is a prime example, or maybe a loud crash happens. So again, how can we know if this is neurotypical? How would this differ in a neuroatypical child when it comes to sensitivity to sound?
Yeah. So I usually, again, I'm looking at the child holistically, so this wouldn't be the only thing. But if I was talking to a parent about this, I might say, how intense is their reaction? And it doesn't necessarily have to be intense to be autism. But if it is very intense and the child is very dysregulated, to me, that would be a sign that they really are avoidant. And we need to give them some like headphones or something to help them manage that so that they can stay regulated, autistic or not. Like if you're having really strong reactions, I want you to be comfortable and not have those strong, overloaded sensory dysregulation reactions. When we have kids who are probably older than like 16 or 18 months and they're covering their ears often, it would be more likely that it could be sensory processing disorder or autism. And then if they develop really strong fears around it. So a lot of autistic kids are very fearful of the vacuum, even when it's not on, because they know it makes that sound. But I mean, we see that a lot just like with hair dryers and fire alarms at school, the blender, like everyday, it's like everyday sounds, especially when it's something that you're doing a lot. Neurotypical babies tend to like adjust really well to that, and they kind of figure it out so that they're not having to like almost relearn that that's a loud sound and it's the blender and I'm safe. Whereas autistic kids tend to do, that's a loud sound, I don't know what it is my body safe? And they kind of go straight to that fight or flight mode, or freeze or fawn, which is harder to recognize when that happens. So it wouldn't necessarily be, yes, this is autism, but if you're noticing those other signs and then you have this, it is very common in autism.
And alternatively, you mentioned this already, that sometimes they can auditory seek, right? Like I have a video that I'm going to play while you're talking, but like in this video, the child is, has a headphone on or putting loud noises near
Two
their
toys.
ear.
Yeah.
Two toys. Explain why they may do that.
Okay, so this is a stim. Most likely, it could be comforting to them if they're overwhelmed, or it could just feel good. And so in this video, this child has two. I'm sure you'll recognize it. I'm pretty sure it's that little Einstein music box that I feel like 90% of infants have, but he has two. And you can't see this, but mom also submitted another video where he had that like a couple of years later still. So that was clearly a special interest for him. Because he has two, he needed to have more than one, because sometimes, right, when you have your child's favorite thing, you want to have an alternative in case you lose that thing, right? Because we don't want to have those strong feelings when we lose our comfort item. But he has two. He's putting them by his ears and he's listening to it. And I would assume he does this often. Okay, so just listening to something one time, okay. Listening to it twice, maybe we're listening to, I don't know, for a specific reason. But autistic kids maybe will do this more often, or put it closer to their ear, or will repeat the same part of a sound over and over and over to find that stim and that comfort.
And I don't think we talked about spinning in circles yet, have we?
I don't think so.
Yeah, let me play one video about this, and then we can describe that. I know this could be a repetitive behavior, but also I would imagine some like like a stim behavior. Let me play this for people, and then we can talk about that.
Maybe it was candy. Maybe PDT.
Stop! I'm trying to read Wyatt.
And before you knew it,
She asked her mother, her 50 cents.
She said,
To give an elephant jump the
it
fence.
was supposed to be a surprise for you. Well, let's go to work on it.
He jumped
Finally, the puzzle
so
was finished.
high.
One piece was missing. The man looked for it
He
everywhere,
reached
but
the
he could
sky.
not find it. That's
He
strange,
didn't
she
come
said.
back.
It's a brand new puzzle. Well, it cannot be helped.
Till the 4th of July.
The next morning,
Till
George
the
did not
4th
do
of
well.
July.
Why do you want Grandpa to read that?
Stop.
Grandpa will read with
The
you.
man was worried. He went to the telephone and called Dr. Baker. I'll be over as soon as I can, said the doctor. Careful.
You fell so
First,
fast.
Dr. Baker looked down. George
Fast?
felt his
You
tummy
fell
rising.
so
He felt
hard.
All right, so this is clearly a reading time that this family has. And so the expectation here is probably that everybody's reading. And this child is spinning. And he does do it for a long time, which I was a spinner. That's one of the things that I know I did when I was a kid. I could sit in an office chair and spin for a really long time. I loved spinning. Because it gives you just comfort. It feels good. And so if he does this, every now and then, again, kids spin, it's fun to spin. But he does this for kind of a long time. He keeps going. And what you don't see in this video is he goes to sit with his grandpa at the end and he does this with his head. So he's like, okay, I did what you told me. I'm reading, but I'm still going to get this input. And he seeks it by twirling his head still. So we do see this, we see spinning a lot. We see autistic kids like to walk in circles around things. They like to talk to themselves. They maybe even stim clearly, like by flapping or talking to themselves or making sounds over and over and over, like tick, 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 while they walk in circles. And so it's just kind of like a routine that they've developed and that they really like to do that helps them calm their bodies.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like we've gone through so many videos. There's one last one, which before we wrap up, which is about toe walking. We get a lot of questions about toe walking, and my question for you is: this likely more due to sensory issues in nature, or is this a sign that you commonly see? And I'll be playing some videos while you talk about this.
So for toe walking, we do see this again in low tone kids. We see it a lot in autistic kids. If your child is toe walking after 2 years of age, I would recommend that you speak to a occupational therapist or physical therapist just to look and make sure everything's okay. Because if you are toe walking for a long period of time, it can cause some damage to, you know what? I don't even know what it is actually, but I know that it's a big problem and it can be very painful as you age. But I do think there's usually a sensory component to this. You might also see this in kids who are hesitant to walk in grass or in different things on the ground. But it's not always going to be autism. For this video, he does make some delayed eye contact and he points. And he does like a 2-point gaze shift. So not the 3 that we talked about earlier, but he does a 2-point, which is also common in autism. So there was a little bit more going on than just the toe walking in this picture. And I think he was even recognizing the logo on the TV, which is an early sign of early reading abilities. And the parent reported that he was hyperlexic, meaning he did learn how to read earlier than a typical child might be. And that also is very common in autism, like teaching yourself to read from like YouTube videos and that strong interest in letters, that is very common in autism.
Andi, so helpful. I mean, we could talk about this all day, and I just feel like this video is so important to me because, again, going through the nuance, talking about the child as a whole picture, you mentioned that multiple times, but allowing families to see the visuals, I think, is so beneficial. So again, thank you to everyone who submitted videos. Is there anything else you'd like to add as a final message, closing remarks, maybe something that we did not discuss that you wish you could, if you had the soapbox, get on and tell families that maybe thinking that their child has autism or maybe already has an autism diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think a big thing that I think people need to know, because so many people tie behavior into autism, I think it's really important to say behavior is not a key part of the diagnosis of autism. So you could have really strong behaviors where you're dysregulated and you're hitting and you're throwing yourself on the floor and you're crying and screaming and acting out and not following directions. Or you could be fawning and be a lot, it's very common, especially in girls, to be like the perfect child at school, the teacher's pet. That was me. And then, and sometimes, like, I really don't remember having strong meltdowns at home, at least when I was older, but a lot of kids will hold it together and mask all day at school and then come home and have those big outbursts and emotions. But that's not specific to autism. It is specific to some characteristics of autism. So if I'm not able to communicate with you, I probably will throw myself on the floor to get my point across and get what I want, my needs met. Similarly, if I am overwhelmed due to sensory needs or there was a change from what I expected to happen and that easily dysregulates me, I will be having those strong tantrums and meltdowns because that's my way of expressing that. And again, my body's in fight or flight and I am fighting because it's like, oh, I need to get this out somehow. And so we really want to support kids through those big emotions and provide them the accommodations so that they hopefully don't have to get to them. But instead of being like you're bad or you're spoiled or the labels that we give these kids, we need to really look at it like you're not acting out, you're not doing this on purpose, you're not manipulating me, you're communicating something with this behavior, and it's my job as an adult to figure out what you need so that I can give that to you, and then you can be successful and comfortable and regulated and happy as much extent as possible.
Thank you, Andi. I enjoyed talking with you today. This, along with the podcast episode that we recorded a year or two ago, are just such a wealth of information. Where can people go to find more information about you? And I know you all also have tons of resources for parents of autistic children. So tell us where we can go to find more information.
Yeah, so my social media is Facebook and Instagram, and I honestly share really everything that, all the information that you need. I don't gatekeep anything into my products, but I do also sell an autism handbook, and that would be really great for parents who are maybe about to get an autism diagnosis or who are new to autism to kind of help them reframe some of those thoughts and really have a better understanding of what your child needs and why they perhaps do some of the things that they do, as well as some accommodations that you can provide to support them. And then I also have an autism handbook for kids, and it's for kids who are older than 7, and it explains to them what autism is and really just like breaks things down to explain why they might do the things that they do, why the way they are the way that they are, and really reinforces that they're not wrong, they're not broken, they're just different. And the research shows if you do know that you are autistic, that this is your diagnosis, you are more likely to have positive mental health outcomes. Because not knowing you're autistic can have a lot of mental health risks. So we see a lot of really big struggles, especially as kids get into those teen years, and 20s and 30s and 40s. When you just get overwhelmed and you can't manage anymore because you've been masking for so long. And so I love that we talk about masking specifically. We talk about advocating, and it's really cool to be able to talk to kids about that. And then I'm also working on a product that has like little books and comics that help you tell your kids that they're autistic, because a lot of parents really struggle with, how do I need to have this conversation? And so that should be ready, April or May. We're just getting illustrations done. But that and the kids handbook are both illustrated, and I am so obsessed with those. And I recommend those to anybody who has autistic kids, because we do want to support them as much as we can. We don't want them to be ashamed of who they are, which kind of is like the old way, like, don't talk about it. But when we teach people not to talk about things, then it's like it's hush hush bad. Whereas if we talk about it openly and we accept you for who you are and we celebrate your differences rather than try to hide them, it's just so much better for mental health and self-acceptance.
Well, I think the next thing on your to-do list would be creating a resource for healthcare providers in autism. I know you're so
That would
busy,
be,
but
yeah.
no, you have helped me so much. Like I said, ever since I started following you and reading your resources, I think I've become better at recognizing autism and getting those early early intervention resources and really saying, hey, look, this is what it is. And it's not that we didn't get training on it. It's just that we didn't get enough training as the diagnosis evolves, right? Meaning we learn so much more about autism as we do anything else. And so as it evolves, clinicians should be evolving too. And sometimes, not everyone is not. And so I want to thank you because you make me a better pediatrician. And I've mentioned this
Aw,
to you
thank you.
before. And you've just made me, more understanding of the needs of autistic children and autistic families. So thank you. I will be adding all of these resources to the caption below, everyone, including where to follow Andi, a link to her handbook, everything that you may need. And if you have any comments, questions, if you love this video, please show the love in the comment section. Remember that we can't diagnose or give personal advice, but I think we can guide you in the right direction or encourage you to get the support that you need. And thank you for joining us today. Andi, thanks for joining me. I enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me. Anytime I get to talk about autism, I love it. So
Thank
anything
you.
to break those stereotypes down.
Yes. And I'll also be linking that podcast episode because it is one that I think people should
So
be
good.
listening to. If you
Yeah.
made it through this video, you're going to want to listen to that one too. So thanks again, Andi.
Thank you.